Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the canyon. A fun bienvenue. As we get down into the... I have mentioned it in too many videos to count. People, particularly when they watch any tire review, particularly in Class 2, which is performed by this guy, and they'll see him do this. And they'll say, wait a minute, hold up. What is with your steer angle? Why do you have the steer angle of a road grader? And I say, well, that's pretty easy to explain. You just do a caster flip. And then they look at me with a blank expression. So rather than show you what it looks like on that guy, we will show you how to do it on this guy. For you, in as condensed... greasy. In as condensed of a packet as we can manage, element caster flip. What is required to do this? You're going to need something that cuts or grinds for one portion of it, because, well, we'll get to that. You don't need anything external of the vehicle. I mean, you need tools, but you don't need any special parts. Everything you need to do to perform the caster flip exists here. So there we have full lock, and we're basically mechanically limited in the behind the axle steering because the end of the rod end hits the bottom of the shock, which is why it's difficult to impossible to run your shocks upside down on an element front end, because they bonk into each other. But we just need to get ourselves 5.5 millimeter wrench and a 2 millimeter hex of your choice. We're going to remove this nut and bolt here, and I would say set them aside, but we're just going to leave them laying right there. We're going to do the exact same thing to the opposite side. And then we're going to take this guy, the tie rod. We're going to take the tie rod out. The tie rod is currently actually a little bit too short, because the vehicle out of the box has a nearly unacceptable level of toe out. The front really sits. So this would be straight. They're they're a little pigeon-toed. They're about like that, which I think they do somewhat intentionally, as this is snugged all the way down. You could go maybe one turn on either end. It's not incidental nor accidental. So what is going to make this easier is we are going to disconnect the panhard so that we can get to what we need to get. Now it is going to make the front end flop around a bit, but we're not going to disconnect the shocks. So we've disconnected the panhard so we can flop the front end around. We are going to remove the screws that go into the C-hubs. I'm going to take these out. At some point in your element ownership, it is almost a certainty that you will strip out a C-hub. It is plastic on plastic, and it is the same type of plastic on the same type of plastic. And it's the opposite of what is it, the galvanic. They don't want to fuse together. They want to slip apart. And when I pop this off, you will see that the splines on the ends of the axle are really more a suggestion of a spline than an actual spline. So it can indeed be problematic. On the back of the C-hub, you've got a fella. On the back of the axle tube, you've got, can we get in there? There he is. See that little fella? When they are installed, I feel like we're gonna have to get the light out so you can see it. When they are installed, see how they point directly at each other? They're lined up. Caster flip is nothing more than putting this hub back on, but when we reinstall the hub, we are going to align it such that we are one spline lower. So we're going to move the arrow on the C-hub down one notch from where it was before. Let's see if the light will show it. So now do you see how it's above because we're upside down? There it is. So that's it. We moved it that far. Now, in moving it that far, what we're going to do is the tie rod formerly was attached to the bottom of this guy. So look now at the angle of our hub. So we have a lot more caster now. Caster is basically giving an exchange of pure forward drive. You're going to sacrifice a little bit of forward drive in exchange for a not insignificant amount of steer angle. Because now we're laid back more, so you can get, like, let's exhibit it with the tire mounted. The tire has far more angle now. What you're going to do over time with this is you're going to get real cavalier with your endpoints. And the edges of your universals, the edges of your joints are going to be all chewed up over time because you will basically be at the physical limit of what a universal joint will do. Look how far that is angled back. If we can get the drive shaft to rotate. We're not too bad yet. And yeah, I know you see it. There's travel stops in the C-Hub. You can trim those off. You can get even more steer angle. You can get steer angle on an element axle to the point where it just breaks everything. You just break everything. You can get into like drift car steer angles. I do not recommend. I am going to flip the other side, and then I'm going to show you why you do indeed have to modify your tie rod. So, we just do the same thing. It is rotated one spline. Sometimes you might be able to, depending on what you're working with, you can get away with 2 splines. But I don't know. We might be able to get away with 2 splines. It does get these are a tiny bit out of parallel. Generally, you can just go to a servo horn that has a hole about 1 or 2 millimeters in tighter, and it'll bring it back. Because when we clocked it, we basically moved that hub away from the steering servo. The line of the panhard doesn't really change appreciably. It actually feels smoother than it did before. And this will also improve well, it doesn't really improve it, but all the angle in the front looks a little better. You're gonna knock up the front of that cover a lot more than you used to. But because we're flipping this is the flip part. Instead of running this link on the bottom of the knuckle, we're going to run it on the top. So the bolt is going to go through into the hub. It's going to go through like that, and we're now on top. And then we're going to do as we did before, and because we flipped it, it's a lot easier to put the front end together. Well, it's slightly easier to put the front end together. And I'm bolting it on now purely for reasons of showing you where we're trying to end up. You will see that it is too long, or it should be. Every time I've done this in the past, it has been too long. And you usually have to take it to a grinder and grind a little bit of the length of the actual threaded portion off, because it doesn't actually look so. We're towed in. We're towed in when I get it tightened down. So we went from a toe out situation to a toe in situation, and it's usually too much. I don't believe that there are any differences in the front end parts on Azul from anything else, but we can't really. It's tough to look down the line of 2 stub axles and determine whether or not we are actually towed in as much as we think we are, but I think it is. So you can cut it down. I usually, and what by usually I mean what is probably going to happen in the next 2 minutes, is I'm going to trim down. I'm going to disassemble the tie rod. I'm going to trim down the ends, the rod ends, trim about 2 millimeters off of each rod end. We are slightly towed in to where the camera almost doesn't even show it. But we will quickly go all the way over. And because I do live on the edge, you get your CHP 170s if you have them on hand, and you just go like this. You don't even need to trim all of it off. It's easier to do with the tire off, but you don't need to trim all of it off. You just need to trim the very tip of the limiter off. And the limiter exists front and back. Can I reach the back? Yes. And we'll just nip this one off as well. Dremel will do it, whatever you want, and it's going to get you, like, we're already putting the tire into it. So now, end point, I didn't trim as much off this one because we can't. Oh no, we're hitting the we're now hitting the pan hard on there. So usually what I'll do is I'll go another step further and I will replace the hollow ball in there to get even more steer angle, because as it's set this way, we can get far more steer angle to the right than we can to the left, because we're at the point of mechanical interference. But are there drawbacks? Is there a drawback to the caster flip in the front? You sacrifice a little bit of forward drive because it changes the point of contact, the point where drive actually comes out of the tire. It changes that a little bit. But it is going to give you significantly more steer angle, and you can trust me on this. Every element axle here has been caster flipped, because I will take that increased steer angle 10 times out of 10. It's not that big of a sacrifice of forward drive. That's your caster flip. And honestly, when I'm looking at it right here, let's go full professionals. If I go lug to lug, front is 220 outer lug to outer lug, and rear is, okay, 230. We're definitely trimming that. It might not look like it when you look at it right like that. You can kind of see it. That is 10 millimeters of cumulative toe in, which means we need to shorten that rear by about, I would say around 6 millimeters should get us about where we want to be. So I will take, let me just, I'll show you this way. You will take an element rod end, and forgive that this one is angled. The ones on the tie rod are not angled, they're just straight. You will take one of these and you will either sand or cut a couple millimeters off of it, or alternately, you will get just like a standard Traxxas rod end or similar rod end. And if you notice the way those line up, that takes about 5 or 6 millimeters off of either end. So there'll be a little bit of thread exposed, but you don't have to cut anything. You can just remove those rod ends, replace them with these rod ends. Bob is indeed your uncle, and then you've got your steering straightened out. So rather than cut these ends, because I really like these ends for other applications, we just thread on. This is very, what I call a Traxxas short. These are actually from probably Vanquish. They're the same color as all the others. And you can see the amount of thread that is now showing. You're going to want to finish the stock link with these ends installed is 145 millimeters eye to eye, right around 145, let's call it between 145 and 146. You want to be between 142 and 143. So you're really only taking about 3 millimeters off. And that is the power of triangles, everybody. Shortening one link by 3 millimeters should alter the relationship of the tires to one another by about 10 millimeters. Now, I can't tell you for sure because I haven't put it back together. But it feels right and it sounds right. We are a little bit toed out. So more towards the 143 side, I would say, but I don't think it is excessive. We are now 227 in the front and about 223, 24. So we're about 4 millimeters toed out. If I would prefer to run neutrally, so I will probably fiddle with it. This is about where it was stock, and as you can see, the tire is all the way into the suspension link. And on the other side, we do get we stop at probably a more reasonable stopping point. We're about 4 or 5 millimeters away from the link because the panhard and the drag link are hitting one another. I mean, the easy fix there, we all know what that is. Servo and axle. Servo and axle would clear that problem right up. But that is the caster flip. The tie rod gets about 3 millimeters shorter, goes on top of the knuckle, and the C-hub is rotated back 1 spline. You can get away with 2 splines, but I would really only recommend that if you're willing to make some more accommodations to get that extreme amount of steer angle. You're going to need a narrower shock that can get out of the way. You're probably going to be servo and axle. So like if you have an Enduro SE, much easier for you to do. You don't have to worry about drag link or panhard getting in the way. You just rotate it back, and you'll most likely just have to run a huge spacer on this knuckle because the knuckle will be rotated so far back. I'm doing a thing when I can just show you right here. The knuckle will be rotated so far back that you'll be running like a 15 millimeter spacer. And then we get that real extreme. I want to say he's 2 splines. He is 2 splines back. But 2 splines back requires making those adjustments. If you are chassis mounted steering, so you're still running a panhard 3-link front end, 1 spline. Don't go past 1 spline, and you will be fine. You will have more steering, and you will enjoy the more steering. And then you can move on to correcting the other problems on the vehicle. But we'll get to those in their own time. That's all we've got for this one. Thank you for joining us for this one. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below, or check the channel description. There is a link to the Discord. Any question you want to ask at any time, someone will be there to answer it. So, thanks for joining us. Tune in for whatever we have next. In between now and then, please want to do your very best. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for joining us here in the canyon. That's how you caster flip. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this is a bone stock Zool, so we've got a lot of work ahead of us.